Thanks for watching Numbskull News, and today we're going to talk about the possibilities of Stanford and Cal coming to the Big 12. Now, a lot of this is based on episode of the Monty Show. Probably a little clickbaity, but that's fine. That's fine. You know, they do get a lot of eyeballs and a lot of traffic, and I'm not trying to clickbait the shit out of you myself, but I thought it was worth talking about since, the Monty Show, they don't get everything right, but, they have some sources that have gotten some things right. So I think it's worth discussing as far as ESPN going to the Big 12 and essentially lobbying for them to take Stanford and Cal. Now, we all know, we've heard all week that the ACC looks like it's going to happen. They're going to take Stanford and Cal. But let's break that down a little bit. The AP put out a story this week, the Associated Press, and essentially saying, there have been meetings. There was meetings between the ADs, but ultimately, the whole thing is going to be decided by the presidents and the chancellors of the ACC, whether or not they add Stanford and Cal. And they haven't been able to get everyone together in the same room or the same Zoom call or whatever to make that decision or talk about it. And there's nothing imminent. There's no, formal meeting scheduled. At least as of Friday, I'm recording this on Saturday. So as of Friday, there was nothing planned. Maybe that changes over the weekend. We'll see. But we have a lot of people saying it, and I still have my doubts. I don't know. I don't know if that's going to happen. And if it's true that ESPN is talking to the Big 12 about taking Stanford and Cal, then there may be a better and good chance of it not happening. And look, Florida State, I don't see them ever welcoming Stanford and Cal. I don't see Clemson doing it. And the reason is because it makes it harder to bust this thing apart if you add more people on, because Stanford and Cal, if they come on, they don't want to see the ACC implode. They want to see it stay together so they can be part of it and make that money, and more importantly, get the exposure of being in the Power 5. Now, the next thing to address is that people constantly have said Stanford and Cal will never go to the Big 12. Well, the thing is, they have 4 friends there now that they're used to being in a conference with, and I believe all of them are AAU schools. So there's that. And the Big 12 is a Power 5. There's that. See what I'm saying? So I don't think they would have a problem going to a Power 5 conference if they're just out there pissing in the wind by themselves and don't know what they're going to do. Right now, there's no money guaranteed to them past the summer of 2024. So let's say this is true. Let's say ESPN has come to the Big 12 and said, hey, could you please consider adding Stanford and Cal? We would like you to do that. Now, my first thought, and I'm sure many, many Big 12 people's first thought, is that if we're going to add 2 from that 4 group, I think I'd rather have Stanford and Oregon State. However, the problem is these teams seem to group up. Oregon and Washington, we heard forever that they were kind of tied to the hip going to the Big Ten. Turns out they were. Texas and Oklahoma, they kind of joined up. USC, UCLA. See what I'm saying? These teams tend to stick together for whatever reason. And I think Stanford and Cal is a package deal. I don't think they're really looking to do something without the other. So first, we need to look at the plus sides, the positive things if the presidents in the Big 12 gave it thought and decided to add Stanford and Cal if they're available. Well, number one, let's start, well, these aren't in any kind of order, but the first thing I'll talk about is the market. It's a huge market. It would be the probably 3rd to 4th biggest market that the Big 12 would be in, so that's huge. And that particular market is in a late night window, which does help. Now, I know we have teams right now. We have 5 teams that can play late night games, but you're adding 2 more that are always in the Pacific time zone. And I'm sure that's something that ESPN does have interest in. They have brand value. Now, look, we know what they are athletically. Academically, we kind of know that too. They're elite. They're elite. As a matter of fact, they're so elite that the Four Corners who did come to the Big 12, you know, that was one of the things that was really holding them in the conference was that allegiance with Stanford and Cal. So if they come in, especially with schools like Arizona State and Utah, who I think were the biggest holdouts, would feel a hell of a lot better about being Big 12 schools. And I think they would solidify and really, they will eventually embrace wholeheartedly being in the Big 12. But I think this, if you add Stanford and Cal, I think that becomes way quicker. They really dig their heels into the Big 12 and pump that up a lot quicker than they're probably going to, especially Arizona State. Now, Arizona State fans, I think they all wanted most of them wanted to come to the Big 12. It's as we know, it's the Michael Crows of the world who had a problem. All right, now let's look at the negative. There are plenty of negatives for bringing them in. And it starts with they are horrible at football and not so great at basketball, if anything at basketball. Now Cal has stepped up their investment in their basketball program. Stanford, of course, is legendary in every sport that doesn't make money. They have competed at a high level before in football. I think they can get there again. And basketball, they've been really good in the past on the men's and women's side. I think they can. I think they know how to do it. The problem right now, especially with Stanford, is NIL. They don't want any part of the NIL world. The transfer portal is a different thing because they have such high entry level standards into those colleges. It's hard to get transfers that qualify. Will they lower their standards? Probably not. Probably not. So they're always going to struggle with transfer guys. But the NIL piece, they're going to have to start getting on board, getting a collective, kind of get going with that a little bit. I know there's going to be federal legislation, but NIL is not going anywhere. There will be, guidelines put into place eventually. But even after those get put into place, you still need NIL. And they're going to have to acquiesce to that and become part of it. Next up, there's been plenty of arrogance with those two schools. That has been made evident with their time in the pack. I think what they're going through now is kind of eroding that arrogance. The fact that they're sitting there essentially on an island, uh, very little prospects of staying in a P5, P4 kind of world. They're I mean, it's desperation to even be talking to the ACC. They're way the hell over there. Travel's insane. And the fact that you're actually pushing for it, and you got Condoleezza Rice with the ACC trying to push for it, that reeks of desperation. And when you get that desperate, that kind of does something to an arrogant attitude. It kind of taps that down quite a bit. So I don't think their arrogance, their snottiness, their whatever you want to call it, I think that'll won't be as big of an issue if they find their way in the Big 12. And of course, culture. Stanford and Cal, that's not exactly a culture fit in the Big 12. But there's a lot of different types of cultures in the Big 12. I mean, UCF is not exactly the same as Oklahoma State. Cincinnati, I don't think, I think culturally is a little different than BYU. I think BYU has its own culture. I think there is a diversity in cultures already with the 16 teams that we have right now. So adding in a different type of culture, I don't think is a real problem. I think it can actually, I don't know if it could be a help or any of that. I just don't see it as being a problem that everyone else thinks it is. Now, it could be if mismanaged or done right, or things aren't expressed up front on what's cool and what's not cool to do. Those kind of things. As long as everyone's open and honest of what they're looking for, what they want, what they will accept, and what they will tolerate and what they're okay with, then I think the culture difference isn't going to be that big a deal. And one of the biggest problems, it is California. And I know there's a lot of people like, hey, especially Cal, they're part of that California Board of Educator grouping. I don't know the technical name, but they're a problem, right? But the thing is, they can't tell Stanford what to do. They're not part of that educational state group. They're independent of that. So was USC. In the Pac 12, they couldn't reach out to Colorado and tell them what to do, or reach out to Oregon, or reach out to Arizona. You know, that they have their control of the schools within their boundaries, and Cal is one of them. But whatever crazy California rulings or whatever happens, it really only affects Cal. It doesn't affect everybody else. So it's, as far as it being California and the government and all that, it's not going to really affect it. It's not going to affect the whole conference. And lastly, I had to ask myself, would I do it? If presented the opportunity with ESPN saying, hey, we would really like for you guys to think about adding Stanford and Cal, would I do it? I would do it. I think I would. I would do it, but caveats have to be put in place. Number one, this is a conference that we don't really tolerate, and we're not going to tolerate unequal revenue sharing. It leads to bad shit. That can lead to a lot of negativity. That can lead to grudges. That could, universities being jealous of somebody else and what they got, so it's best to keep it everyone on an equal playing field. Everyone makes an equal cut of the money. Everybody has an equal say. That has to be a foundational piece of the Big 12. This is why all these teams have come together, coalesced, and why the new Big 12, the 16-member Big 12, is solid as a rock. So I think if you introduce Stanford and Cal and say, okay, they're only going to make so much money. They're not going to make the full 31.7. They're not going to make the full share, right? You can't do that because that's going to cause problems. Here's the only caveat to that caveat would be, okay, they can come in, you're going to pay them essentially a half share or whatever the amount is until 2025. That's when the 4 new schools, former G5 schools coming into the Big 12, that's when they're going to start making their full share. So we'll need Stanford and Cal to make that full share at that point. Whether that's fully paid by ESPN or whether they can somehow talk Fox into it or make a deal with Amazon or whatever. But I would put that on ESPN. If you want them here and you're willing to pay for them, that's fine. But they can't be a half share all the way to 2031. By 2025, they need to be a full member. That's important for us, and that's something that ESPN will have to work out. We're not going to ESPN trying to work something out, trying to get Stanford and Cal here. Y'all have come to us, asked us to consider it. Okay, we will consider it if you can do X, Y, and Z. That's the first one. The next caveat, Stanford and Cal have to invest in their football and basketball programs. We know how legendary Stanford is on all the Olympic sports. That's wonderful. Football and basketball pays the bills. They have to get on board. That means NIL. That means having expectations for your coaches, hiring good coaches and support staff. They're going to have to invest in those 2 programs because that's what's going to make your money, and that's what will help overall the Big 12 grow. So with those 2 things said, would I do it? Yes, I would, because I think if you talk about adding in 2 pretty decent sized brands in this space, Stanford and Cal, those are pretty good brands. I know they haven't been worth a damn in football in a long time, basketball, but the brand thing is real. The perception of the Big 12 has elevated already. Those two schools could serve as a couple little cherries on top of this great Sunday that all of a sudden has, been presented. I mean, it was dog shit. Now it's a full, beautiful Dairy Queen Sunday. Or dare I say, I actually sit down restaurant Sunday. And those two brands can actually help push the perception of the Big 12 even to loftier heights. That's why I think there's enough positive things that would kind of cancel out some of the negative things. I think some of the bigger negative things with Stanford and Cal can be worked around, worked through, and or either that or just completely overridden by the positives of having them in the conference. Now, I know there's some people out there, and I don't blame you, that say never in a million years do you want Stanford and Cal. I understand it. I'm just thinking business wise, perception, brand value, the brand of the Big 12, does it help those things? I think Stanford and Cal could. And like I said, ESPN has to figure out a way to get them fully paid for. And that means either they write the whole check or they work with Fox or Amazon or someone to get them fully paid for. That's not the legwork that Brett Yormark has to do. That's not the legwork that our presidents or our ADs or chancellors have to go out and do. If you want them here, ESPN, you do that work. If you're willing to do all that means you're really serious about it. You're really wanting this. And at that point, that's your primary business partner is ESPN. Fox being the secondary one. So if your primary business partner is willing to take those steps to get them in the conference, get them paid for, to adhere to the caveats you would have, I think you do it. I think you do it at that point because you don't just toss aside something that ESPN wants. It doesn't mean you have to do it. That doesn't mean you have to give in to the whatever qualm or whim of ESPN. But if they're willing to put in that kind of work, that means they're really serious. And you should take that seriously if you're the Big 12. Like, hey, they wanted you to come to market early, right? They wanted to do a deal with you. You got a deal done. You listened to them. You did what you needed to do to jump the Pac 12 and get your TV deal. So when they come to you now and say, hey, look, we got these two teams, they're good brands, serious market. As far as academic brands, they're elite. They got some work to do. They got some shine they got to put on that football program. Same thing with the basketball. But they've been there before. They've been competitive before. They could be that again. Would you take them? We'll get them paid for. Full share of the whole nine. Okay. I think at that point, if they're that interested, if ESPN is that interested in doing that, cool. The only thing left is the actual talk to the presidents and chancellors of those two universities. With Brett, some of the serious ADs, the big ADs in the Big 12, some of the presidents of the Big 12, talk to them and see how serious they are about being in the Big 12. Would they embrace being here? Especially having 4 former conference mates in the Four Corners that are now here. How they feel about that. Are they all good with BYU? Because BYU's not going anywhere. We're not going to kick them out and bring you in. They're here for the long term. So, are you willing to share that space with a serious religious institution? Not to mention Texas Christian University, Baylor. We got Christian universities here. God means something in the Big 12. You got to be cool with that. You don't have to look. Stanford doesn't have to all of a sudden become a Baptist or Methodist university in order to join the Big 12. But don't expect everyone else to turn their back on God because that's what you say goes. No. You got to be cool with that. You got to be respectful of it. You don't have to participate, but be respectful. As long as everyone can be an adult in the room, I think it could work. But that's kind of my thought on it. I still have some serious doubts about Stanford and Cal making their way to the ACC because I think there's too many people there that don't want to expand. And when you're talking FSU and Clemson being two of your biggest brands, and I don't blame the ACC at all. The rest of the school saying, you know what, we're not going to listen to the blue bloods. We're going to do what's best for the conference. That's exactly what they should do. And expansion is what's best for the ACC. I think those two targets are stupid. The travel, everything doesn't make sense at all. I understand you would bring in SMU too, like a middle stop, but does that really help you? Or maybe it does. And look, I think ESPN would like that because they don't want to lose. They don't want to see the ACC implode. They got until 2036 on a sweetheart deal. They want to keep that till 2036. Adding those teams helps that. But if they're hell bent on imploding, then, could I see ESPN say, okay, but we're still interested in Stanford and Cal. We're doing business with them right now with Fox on the last year of the Pac 12 deal. We've been doing business with them. We still like to do business with them in the Big 12. It's possible. Anyway, that's all I got on that crap. We'll see if it happens. We should find out this week if Stanford and Cal is going to make their way to the ACC. I have my doubts, but the last time I said that, I was wrong. But I'm going to say it again. I don't know about that. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll be back with some other crap later. Bye.